Welcome back to Intro to Religion. In this video, we're going to look at the main types of religion. A typology is a system for classifying things of a given kind into smaller subcategories. An example is biological taxonomy, which classifies organisms into different species. So there are going to be some limitations to our typology of religion. We're going to go through 8 different types of religion, but keep in mind that religions can partially belong to one of those types. They can exhibit some features of the type and not others. For example, many religions have traces of animism or belief in spirits, including spirits of nature. Another limitation of our typology is that a given religion, such as Christianity, can belong to more than one type at the same time. They're not absolute categories such that at most one could apply. So Christianity, for example, is a prophetic religion, is a scriptural religion, is also a missionary religion. And there can be types of Christianity that are fundamentalist. Despite these limitations, there are definitely advantages to talking about types of religion. For one thing, if we know a religion fits a certain type, we can quickly identify some of its salient or important properties. So for example, if you know that Buddhism is, at least historically, a missionary religion, that tells you something important about it. You can also use typology to notice patterns of resemblance and difference between different religions. So looking at religions of the same type, you'll notice the similarities because they belong to that type, but you may also notice differences, especially if one religion belongs to 2 types, but another religion only shares one of those types, for example. So the first type of religion we'll discuss is animism. This is religion based on belief in spirits, such as ancestor spirits, spirits of the dead, and spirits that inhabit plants, animals, and natural objects like stones, mountains, or rivers. Animism is the oldest type of religion. So all human societies were originally animist. It dates back to the Paleolithic period. Paleolithic means old stone, so it's the earliest period in human technology or material culture. But the Paleolithic period goes to the distant past, to pre-human hominid ancestors like Homo erectus and earlier. But it ended in many parts of the world around 10,000 BCE. Animism is still practiced today, especially by hunter-gatherer societies, the few that are left. These are societies that sustain themselves mainly through hunting and gathering or foraging, rather than through farming. But traces of animism are definitely present in other societies as well. So the picture on the right is of a shaman or holy man in animism from Tuva, which is part of the Russian Federation. And he's performing a fire seance. So this would be an animist ritual. So let's talk a bit more about spirits. Belief in spirits is central to animism. It's also common in other types of religion. A spirit could be defined as an immaterial sentient being. So they're sentient, which means aware or conscious, just like people, but they lack ordinary physical or material bodies, unlike people. So we can talk somewhat meaningfully about friendly versus unfriendly spirits. Unfriendly spirits are the ones that are regarded as causing disease, bad luck, famine, or other types of misfortune. Friendly spirits are the ones that are curing diseases, bringing good fortune or abundance. And animism is often focused on trying to placate or ward away unfriendly spirits and to get the assistance of friendly spirits. The thing to keep in mind is that in animism, it's often common for the same spirits to be either friendly or unfriendly, depending upon how you treat them or their relation to you. So this is unlike many later religions like Christianity, Islam, or Judaism, which might make a distinction between the good spirits, angels, and the evil spirits, demons. In animism, it is possible for them to believe in demons or evil spirits, but it's very common for there just to be spirits, and whether they are helpful or harmful really depends on your relation to them. Have you accidentally offended a spirit, say by cutting down its tree, if it's a tree spirit, or by harming it in some way. Then it could turn against you and maybe cause disease. You'll also notice the salience of disease and health with regard to spirits. Traditionally, many human societies believe that diseases were caused in whole or in part by the activity of spirits. And so to cure disease, you might perform an exorcism to get rid of a bad spirit, or give it an offering so it would take the disease away, and so on. You can even see traces of this belief in Christianity, insofar as Jesus Christ, his ministry was a healing ministry, where a lot of what he did was casting out evil spirits that were believed to cause disease in those times. The picture on the right is by William Blake, famous English artist from the 1700s or the 18th century. But it depicts fairies or nymphs. These are spirits that are still believed in some parts of Europe, mainly Iceland, but were believed for a long time, even after animism died out there. Belief in nature spirits was combined with other religions, mainly Christianity. A shaman is a person who acts as an intermediary between humans and the spirit world. Other names for shamans are medicine man, spirit medium, or witch doctor. Spirit medium is especially common. Many, but not all, animist religions have shamans. So these are kind of like the earliest experts in society. One of the first occupations would be someone who was an expert at dealing with the spirits. And they may believe to have been born with a gifted ability to communicate with spirits, or they may have been taught by another shaman how to do it, or a combination of both. You can also see shamans present in or mixed with religions that aren't animist, such as Tibetan Buddhism, Chinese Taoism, and Korean Buddhism. An example is the picture of a Tibetan shaman on the right. Now, this is a shaman from the Bon religion of Tibet, but Bon combines aspects of Buddhism with animism. And so you can see in the headdress of a shaman, there are pictures of Buddhas and awakened beings from Buddhism. And even though the shaman is not a Buddhist monk or clergyman, they do have Buddhist beliefs that have been mixed with their animistic beliefs. So let's go over some examples of animist rituals. You see these in other types of religions as well, but they go back to animism, the earliest form of human religion. Divination rituals involve contacting spirits to gain special or useful information. Healing rituals involve placating or driving away unfriendly spirits, calling upon friendly spirits to cure you, or both. Hunting rituals are performed to ensure the success of a hunt. Coming of age rituals mark off a person's entry into adulthood. It's the transition from being a child to being an adult member of the community. And a death ritual accompanies the burial of a deceased person. The picture on the right shows a traditional healer from the Bamasaba people of Uganda. You do see animistic religions still practiced in sub-Saharan Africa, although they're being rapidly replaced by Christianity and Islam, which are spreading pretty quickly. So one thing about hunting rituals is that it's more common, as I understand it, to perform a ritual to ensure the success of a hunt, rather than when you're going out foraging or gathering. If you think about hunts, they're kind of risky, often, practices that have a low chance of success. It can be very difficult to successfully find, track, and kill an animal. It's much more risky and unsure to be successful than when you're going out foraging for herbs or berries, for example. So you see sometimes rituals being coupled with these high risk but potentially high reward events. A second type of religion after animism is Neolithic religion. This is named after the Neolithic period, in which humans were still using stone tools like in the Paleolithic, but they began to domesticate plants and animals. So it's the beginning of farming or agriculture. So for example, cultivating wheat or other grains as food instead of just gathering or foraging from the land. And instead of hunting exclusively, having some animals that you raise from birth, like cattle, for example. The Neolithic period began in the Middle East around 10,000 BCE, and it corresponds to the beginning of a new type of religion. So Neolithic religion focuses on worshiping gods associated with fertility, death, war, and cosmic cycles. They had other types of gods as well, but those are some of the common associations they had with the main beings they worshipped. Another characteristic of Neolithic religions is what modern scholars call an axis mundi. This is a symbolic center of the world or the universe. And these correspond to some of the stone structures built by practitioners of Neolithic religion. So an example is the hilltop tombs or mounds built in Ireland and other parts of Europe during the Neolithic. The Neolithic came to Europe later than the Middle East. There was basically a gradual migration of farmers from the Middle East to Europe throughout the Neolithic period. So agriculture did not reach Ireland and the other British Isles until relatively late. But the Neolithic cultures there built some pretty spectacular monuments, including this in Newgrange, Ireland. So this is a mound. It may have been a burial mound of a leader. And this is often used as an example of an ancient axis mundi or symbolic center of the world. So what the axis mundi tend to have in common is that they're regarded as connecting the earth or the lower world with the sky or the upper world. Cosmic cycles are a really important feature of Neolithic and later religions. The cosmic cycles are repeating patterns of phenomena in nature, such as the movements of the sun, the moon, planets, and stars. So in the Neolithic period probably lies the origin of the various traditions of astrology that you can find in different societies. Astrology is the pre-scientific study of celestial phenomena, i.e. the motions of the sun, moon, planets, and stars. And it's likely that cosmic cycles and the origin of astrology can be associated with this period because of the importance of timing for agriculture. It's really important to know the seasons and how the time of year correlates with the weather to know when you should plant, harvest your crops, when you should graze or slaughter your livestock, etc. And astrology, among other things, enabled people to correlate more precisely where the sun was rising on the horizon and what the weather was going to be like with the seasons. And so we see this reflected in Neolithic religion. One example of this is the megaliths of Stonehenge in England that were built between 3000 and 2000 BCE. And there are aspects of this arrangement of large stones or megaliths that corresponds to the summer solstice. The solstice in the summer is the longest day of the year, and the winter solstice is the shortest day of the year. And so these can be important for planning the planting and harvesting of crops, because we need to know how much sunlight we're going to get. The more sunlight we get, the more crops can grow. As the sunlight goes down, that's when we need to think about harvesting and getting everything ready for winter. So I mentioned this term gods. What is a god? A god is basically the same as a spirit, but you could classify it as a powerful spirit. They tend to be greater in power and influence, and oftentimes they can be associated with the general area of influence or control or a general attribute. So some examples of that are gods of the sky, the earth, the sea, the sun, moon, grain, cattle, weather, warfare, or death in the land of the dead. There are other types of gods as well. Whereas spirits are more likely to be associated with particular places, like the spirit of this mountain, or of this rock, or of this river, as opposed to being the god of storms and the weather in general. Some examples of storm gods include Zeus, the Greek god of the storm and thunder, and also king of the gods, Thor, who's the god of thunder and storms in Norse or ancient German religion, and Indra, who's the god of storms and thunder in the ancient Hindu or Indian religion. And these gods actually are probably related culturally because the Greeks, the ancient Germans, and the ancient Indians all had languages that were descended from a common source. And so they probably also had religious similarities in terms of their notions of the gods and so on. So let's talk about some of the ways in which gods are depicted. Anthropomorphic means the god has a human form or shape. Theriomorphic means the god has an animal form or shape. It's also possible for gods to be merely associated with or symbolized by animals, even if they're not literally depicted as animals. Some animals show up in many cultures as depictions of gods. Examples are goddesses associated with cats and gods associated with bulls. So on the right is depicted in the image the ancient Egyptian goddess Bast, who in this case is depicted as having a human body and the head of a cat. Earlier in Egyptian history, she was depicted just as being a cat, and this is a kind of split form. It was common at a certain point in ancient Egyptian religion to depict the gods as having the body of a human but the head of some animal, such as a cat in this case. There are other goddesses who are associated with cats, including tigers. Durga in Hinduism and Shiwangmu, or the Queen Mother of the West, in Taoism. There are many bulls used to depict or associated with gods in ancient religions. An example is the Apis bull from Egyptian religion, who was associated with death and rebirth. The god El from ancient Canaanite religion. This was the religion out of which Judaism evolved, at least in part. And Shiva in Hinduism. A third general type of religion after Neolithic is the priestly religion. This grew out of Neolithic religion. Indeed, many of the examples of gods that we just discussed are from a later period after the Neolithic and were from priestly religions. However, there's reason to believe there was a great deal of continuity between Neolithic and priestly religions in terms of the way the gods are conceived, just based on archaeology and the artifacts that depict the gods. So we can date priestly religion from around 3000 BCE with the development of metallurgy, such as bronze working, and cities. So these are societies that are still getting their food from farming and raising livestock like the Neolithic period, but they have a new technology, working metals for tools and weapons, and they're starting to build larger cities. You can define priestly religion as focusing on the worship of gods by specially trained priests, and they often do so at designated sacred structures, such as temples, altars, shrines, or high places. You can see in the picture on the right, which is a modern reconstruction of Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, that there's both a high place at the back or rear of the temple on the left, where you can see a depiction of the Ark of the Covenant and the two cherubim who are surrounding it. So this is believed to be where the presence of God is most noticeable or most present. And you can also see a high place on the outside of the temple, the platform on the right, where burnt offerings would be given to God. So we can define a priest as a specialist in rituals who serves as an intermediary between the gods and other people. So they're like shamans in that respect. One distinction between a priest and a shaman is that priests are often especially devoted to particular gods, not always, but often. So, for example, in the ancient Roman religion, you would be a priest in a particular god, such as Jupiter, perhaps, or Hera, the wife of Jupiter. An example of a class of priests from the ancient world is the Levites from ancient Judaism. In order to be a priest in the ancient Jewish religion, you had to be born into the clan or the tribe of Levi. So not everyone was allowed to serve as a priest. There are other priestly religions where people don't have to be born into a particular family to function as a priest. They just have to get the right education. So it could work either way. The priests, though, tend to memorize a large body of oral traditions, ceremonies, sometimes texts, either transmitted orally or through writing in later periods. And you could use this to somewhat differentiate them from shamans as well. There's a greater degree of consistency or conformity of practice, you would say, between the priestly religions and the animistic ones that involve shamanism. So let's talk for a moment about priests among Indo-European peoples. The term Indo-European is a linguistic term referring to a language family that includes many modern languages of Europe and Asia that were derived from a common linguistic ancestor. The Proto-Indo-Europeans is the name given to the ancient people whose language is the ancestor of those many modern languages. Examples of Indo-European languages include Romance languages like Portuguese, Spanish, French, and Italian, Germanic languages such as English, German, Danish, Norwegian, and Swedish, Slavic languages such as Polish and Russian, and other languages as well, such as Greek and Armenian. And you can also see Indo-European languages in Asia, such as Farsi, the language of Iran, and many languages of modern India and Pakistan, such as Urdu and Hindi. So these are believed by modern linguists to all be derived from an ancient source. You can see on the map the modern distribution of Indo-European languages in light green and the presumed or reconstructed homeland of the Proto-Indo-Europeans in dark green. The Proto-Indo-Europeans are probably identified with the Yamnaya, as this people is known to archaeology. And the Yamnaya were one of the ancient nomadic groups in the Eurasian steppe. The steppe was a very dry land that was able to sustain grass in which you could graze horses, for example, but you were not able to farm there. And so the people who ended up living on the steppe figured out how to be mobile with large herds of domesticated horses and other domesticated animals, and they would wander around to graze their herds in different parts of the grassland. And the mobility and nomadic character of the Proto-Indo-Europeans is probably one of the reasons why their languages ended up spreading so far. So it's thought by modern scholars that Proto-Indo-Europeans had three main social classes. One of the pieces of evidence for this is that many of the cultures that spoke Indo-European languages in ancient times had this sort of tripartite class system. A class of warriors, a class of priests, and basically everyone else. So some examples of the priests of Indo-European speaking peoples are the Brahmins of the Indo-Aryans. These are still a part of Hinduism today. The Indo-Aryans were an ancient Indo-European people who probably migrated from Central Asia into northern India starting around 1500 BC. There are other Indo-European peoples, though, who also had classes of priests, including the Celts. They inhabited much of Western Europe in ancient times. There are still some Celtic languages spoken in parts of Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. In ancient times, the Celts had a very powerful, influential class of priests called the Druids. And another example of this is the Magi, as they're known in the West, which was a class or a clan or a tribe of priests in ancient Persia. And they're largely associated with Zoroastrianism, but they may have predated it and just go back to the origins of Persian priestly religion before the reforms of the prophet Zoroaster. So now let's talk about prophetic religion. Prophetic religion is the fourth type of religion that began around 1000 BCE, which is around the beginning of the Iron Age. So this is a continuation of the use of metal for tools and weapons, but in the earlier period, it's what's known as the Bronze Age, in which most tools and weapons were made from bronze, which is an alloy of copper and tin. As I understand it, the tin makes the copper more tough and durable, but iron tools and weapons are more durable still than bronze, and so it quickly spread as like a new metalworking technology. So a prophet is a person who speaks on behalf of or receives teachings or revelations from God or some other god or spirit. And prophetic religion, you could think of it as a continuation of priestly religion. The difference is that the main beliefs of priestly religion are just part of the culture. They're not attributed to a particular person, usually, as being the author of these teachings. It's similar to how a language is transmitted socially without a story as to who invented the language. It's just a custom that gets transmitted from generation to generation and gets subtly modified and tweaked over time. Whereas prophetic religions are traced back to a specific named prophet or a lineage or group of prophets who have special teachings, and oftentimes they end up reforming or changing or added to the religion that they had inherited from their culture. An example of this is Moses, who's one of the most important prophets of Judaism. So Moses is regarded as having received special teachings, laws, commandments, and other teachings from God on Mount Sinai and other places. And the teachings that were revealed to Moses became one of the main foundations of the Jewish religion. Another example of an ancient prophet is Zarathustra. He's believed to have lived around 628 to 551 BCE, although this is just an estimate. It's difficult to date him precisely. Zarathustra was a prophet who reformed the ancient Persian religion. So the religion he founded based on his new teachings is called Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism is a word derived from Zoroaster, which is how the Greeks referred to Zarathustra. Zarathustra had many innovative teachings. One of them was monotheism, in which there's only one God, or at least only one supreme being who exists. Zarathustra called the one God Ahura Mazda. Ahura is an ancient Persian word that means essentially a divine being, like a god. So this is the god or the divine being Mazda. And Ahura Mazda is regarded as the supreme creator in Zoroastrianism. However, Zarathustra also taught what's known as dualism, that there are two main forces or powers in the world. Specifically, he believed in Angra Mainyu, which was an evil being who opposes the good god Ahura Mazda, and he thought that all humans have a choice. They must choose whether to follow and worship Ahura Mazda, or they're going to end up following and serving Angra Mainyu, whether they know it or not. So finally, he taught a day of judgment in which all souls of humans will be judged and face punishment or reward based on their actions. So these three teachings may have originated with Zarathustra, and they proved quite influential in any case, because you can see them in other religions such as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It's believed by many scholars that ancient Jews may have been influenced by Zoroastrianism because of the proximity of the kingdom of Judah to ancient Persia, and especially because of the Babylonian exile, in which many Jews were exiled to Babylon. They were later liberated after the Persians conquered Babylon, but many of the Jews remained in Babylon under Persian rule, and they may have been exposed to some of the teachings of the Zoroastrian priests. So another group of prophetic religions is called the Abrahamic religions. These include Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and they're all based on the lineage of prophets that began with Abraham. So in Judaism, this is the oldest Abrahamic religion, the authentic prophets include Abraham, Moses, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and many others. Christianity and Islam accept all of the prophets of Judaism, but they add other teachings or prophets of their own. So in Christianity, they accept Moses and the other Jewish prophets, but they add Jesus as the Messiah, the divinely anointed king, and as the Son of God. And most Christians also believe that Jesus is God. And Islam, they accept all the prophets of Judaism, and they accept Jesus is a prophet and the Messiah, but they don't regard him as the Son of God or as God, and they add Muhammad as the last and greatest of the prophets. But these religions, despite their important differences, do have a lot of similarities. They are monotheistic. Most of them believe in an afterlife with divine reward and punishment, and in dualism. So in Judaism, the figure of Satan, who originally may have been just an angel who tested people to see if they were faithful to God, his name literally means adversary. And if you look at him in the book of Job, he seems to be doing God's bidding by testing Job to see if he's going to be faithful. But in the later tradition of Judaism that influenced Christianity and Islam, Satan became regarded as an evil figure who opposed the will of God and who led people astray through temptation to sin. And this had a big influence on Christianity and Islam, may have been influenced by the Zoroastrian teaching of Angra Mainyu. A fifth type of religion is called mystery religion. This is religion in which core teachings and rituals are kept secret from outsiders and revealed only to initiates, that is, people who've been inducted into the religion, in the hope of attaining blessings or salvation in this life or the next. So mystery religions originated around 500 BCE, later on in the Iron Age. So these religions can be described as esoteric in that they have secret or hidden teachings or meanings that are revealed to insiders and not to outsiders. And you can contrast esoteric religions or teachings with exoteric or public religions or teachings. So some examples of mystery religions were the Eleusinian mysteries from ancient Greece. The picture on the right is an image used by followers of the Eleusinian mysteries, named after the city of Eleusis. So this was a religion based on the Greek goddesses Demeter and Persephone. Demeter was the goddess of grain and Persephone was her daughter. So in this image, Triptolemus is receiving wheat from Demeter and blessings from Persephone. So Triptolemus is basically a symbol of the initiate of the religion. You're going to come in a closer relationship with Demeter and Persephone and receive their blessings and abundance. That's the basic idea being expressed here. So the word mystery actually comes from an ancient Greek word mustos, which means hidden. And it's based on religions that started to arise around 500 BCE in the Eastern Mediterranean that had some of these hidden teachings. Mystery religions were not unique, though, to Greece or the ancient Mediterranean. You can see similar types of religions throughout the world. An example from India is Tantric Hinduism. This was a type of Hinduism which taught specific mantras or chants and mudras or gestures to its initiates that were believed to give a more rapid and direct path to spiritual liberation. So there was a similar type of Buddhism called Vajrayana that emerged around the same time. And this is the first couple of centuries CE or AD. You can also see what are called sometimes Gnostic religions that originated from the Mediterranean in the first few centuries CE. So this is around the same time as the origin of Tantric Hinduism. The Gnostic religions were a diverse bunch. Some of them are Christian, some of them are not. And some people even dispute whether the term Gnostic is even useful as a category. However, what they do have in common is that they were basically mystery religions, in that they tended to regard their core teachings as hidden from the world, most people as being deceived and trapped in some kind of fallen or sinful state. And you had to understand the secrets, the mysteries, the hidden knowledge of the Gnostic religion in order to attain salvation. A sixth type of religion is scriptural religion. And this is religion based on sacred texts. Now, many religions have sacred texts, but they're generally only classified as scriptural religions if they place supreme authority or a high degree of authority and emphasis upon the teachings of those texts, as opposed to also believing there are traditions outside the text that are very important. Some examples of scriptural religions include Rabbinic Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Rabbinic Judaism is so named because it's based on the teachings of the rabbis, who were interpreters of the Hebrew Bible in ancient times as today. So the priestly version of Judaism was more focused on performing rituals at the temple in Jerusalem. And rabbinic Judaism was focused on interpreting the Hebrew Bible to get insight into the religion and just to being, I guess, a good Jew. When the temple was destroyed by Romans in 79 CE, priestly Judaism basically died out because there was no more temple to perform the rituals at, and so rabbinic Judaism came to prominence. Christianity is also a scriptural religion because most Christians base their teachings, at least in large degree, upon the Hebrew Bible, which is called the Old Testament by Christians, and the New Testament, which includes the Gospels as well as other texts like the Acts of the Apostles and the Revelation of John. And Islam can definitely be considered a scriptural religion because most Muslims base their teachings on the Quran, which is believed to have been revealed to Muhammad by Allah or God. And also many Muslims also derive teachings from the Hadith, which are collections of stories about the Prophet Muhammad, which are not revelations from God, but can also be authoritative as to how a Muslim is expected to live. So we can use the term sacred canon to refer to a collection of scriptures or sacred texts that are regarded as authoritative in a given religion. So for example, for Jews, the sacred canon is the Hebrew Bible. For Christians, it's the Hebrew Bible plus the New Testament. And for Muslims, the sacred canon is just the Quran. Other examples of sacred canons are the Veda in Hinduism, which are the oldest Hindu scriptures and one of the main foundations for Hindu belief even today, and the Tripitaka in Buddhism. The Tripitaka refers to the triple basket or three collections of texts that most Buddhists share. Now, there are different versions of the Tripitaka among Theravada versus Mahayana and Vajrayana Buddhists, but there are many texts shared in the Tripitaka of Buddhists in general. A seventh type of religion is missionary religion. This is religion that actively seeks to gain converts to the religion by sending missionaries or representatives of the religion to teach other individuals and even whole societies about the religion. So this is a familiar way of practicing religion today, but it wasn't always so. If you look at human history, throughout most of human history, people just inherited their religion from their culture. It's what they grew up with, like their language. It was just a set of customs that were regarded as authoritative, and that you wouldn't think of going to another culture to convert them to your religion, just like you wouldn't necessarily think of going to another culture and thinking to convert them to your language. However, around 400 BCE, with the advent of Buddhism and some other religions of India that also actively sought converts, you see the rise of missionary religions. So Buddhism was not the only missionary religion to emerge out of ancient India. There were a group of sects that were kind of competing for followers, especially after around 500 BCE. These include Jainism and parts of Hinduism, but Buddhism was the one that was probably most successful as a missionary religion because they sent monks and missionaries not just to different parts of India, but to other parts of Asia as well. Christianity was a very important missionary religion in Europe, Asia, and Africa. So the early Christians initially just sought converts among fellow Jews, but eventually reached out to Gentiles or non-Jews as well. And it became a very rapidly spreading religion. And finally, Islam was another very successful missionary religion that started in ancient Arabia. Muhammad initially wanted to convert the Arabs to Islam because he wanted them to be monotheistic like the Jews and Christians, but Islam ended up spreading as well beyond the Arabs to other peoples. So in addition to whole religions that have this missionary character, sometimes there are particular sects of a religion that are missionary. An example of this in Judaism is Lubavitch Chabad. So most Jews are not particularly missionary. They're not trying to gain converts. However, Lubavitch Chabad actively seeks converts to their particular sect, at least among other Jews. And an example of this from Hinduism is ISKCON, which stands for the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. They're popularly known as Hare Krishna because that's part of one of the chants or prayers that they sing. And they're actively seeking converts among non-Hindus, especially Western people, which is rather unusual for Hindu sects. The picture on the right is of LDS or Latter-day Saints, colloquially known as Mormon missionaries on the island of Fiji in the Pacific. The eighth and last type of religion we'll discuss is called fundamentalism. Fundamentalism is a modern religious movement that seeks to return to the perceived original or pure form of a religion. It's named after a series of texts called the Fundamentals that were published in the United States in the early 1900s. This was a type of Christian fundamentalism, which sought to protect Christianity against what it perceived as encroachments against traditional Christian beliefs by modern science and modern society. So examples of scientific beliefs that conflict with Christianity and many other religions are modern astronomy, geology, and biology. So these conflict with biblical accounts of creation and the cosmology or structure of the universe. So the cosmology derived from modern astronomy and physics, for example, says that the Earth is not the center of the universe, and the Earth is just one planet around a star. The star is not the center of the universe. There are many different suns and planets, and the universe is very old, billions of years, which contradicts the account in the Bible. And similarly, modern geology was the first indication that the Earth is a lot older than people suspected. When modern geology got started in the early 1800s, this eventually started to put pressure on the biblical account of creation, and indeed on other similar creation stories in other religions. And modern biology especially came to conflict with traditional religious beliefs with the theory of evolution by natural selection developed by Charles Darwin in the mid-19th century, because this conflicts with the biblical account of creation according to which God created humans, animals, and plants in their specific kinds or species that we still have today, and that there was no period of evolution from the creation, as well as the biblical creation story contradicting the great amounts of time which passed according to evolution by natural selection. So typically fundamentalists react to modern science by denying the specific scientific claims that conflict with or contradict their religious teachings. They don't necessarily reject all of modern science, but they will reject the specific parts of science that they have a problem with, that contradict their religion. As well, fundamentalism arose as a reaction against the beginnings of feminism and other aspects of modern sexual and social morality or modern culture that conflicts with the values of Christianity or other traditional religions or traditional approaches to those religions. So for example, most if not all religions express very patriarchal values where men are given authority over women, so it's not really gender egalitarian. And oftentimes they advocate a very traditional family structure, family values. It's a very complex set of phenomena we're talking about here, but basically a lot of these beliefs started to be challenged, especially in the late 19th, early 20th century, with the first wave of feminism, which advocated equality under the law for women and granting women the right to vote, for example. So fundamentalists differ in terms of their beliefs and practices based on their religion and based on their particular interpretation of the original or pure form of their religion, which, by the way, is often a kind of modern reconstruction that doesn't necessarily match historically what the early religion looked like. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But fundamentalists in general, regardless of their religion, often advocate a literal interpretation of the scriptures, as opposed to interpreting it as a metaphor or an analogy exclusively. And they also often advocate traditional moral and family values, even where those conflict with modern values that are common in modern societies. So an example is fundamentalists will often oppose gay rights, for example, or gay marriage because that conflicts with the customs of most religions. Um, and they may stick with the literal interpretation of the biblical creation story or some other creation story and reject modern science such as geology or biology. And in addition to rejecting specific teachings of modern science that conflict with their religion, they also tend to reject those aspects of popular culture that they regard as problematic. So, for example, Harry Potter was criticized by many fundamentalist Christians anyway as being satanic or kind of like a gateway to worshiping the devil because of the presence of magic in it. You can see a kind of similar idea in the comic strip shown in the picture to the right, which is by the famous evangelical Christian artist Jack T. Chick. He evidently was a illustrator and he became an evangelical Christian and decided to make a lot of now pretty famous comics illustrating his beliefs. So you can see here it says kids love Halloween because it's both fun and scary, but they have no idea what's behind this celebration. To Satanists and witches, Halloween is no joke. It's their most solemn ceremony of the year. So this is a criticism of the cultural holiday of Halloween, which is a big part of American culture and some other modern nations' culture too. It's not usually thought of in a religious context, more just like a fun custom, a way of celebrating autumn, for example, even though it's rooted in the Christian holiday of All Saints' Day or All Hallows' Day. But Jack Chick and some other fundamentalists in Christianity regard Halloween as devil worship, and so you should not participate in any of the customs associated with the holiday. Another example of things that fundamentalists reject is certain modern values like equal rights for gays or people who are transgendered, for example. And interestingly, fundamentalists can even reject their own religion's traditions if they regard those traditions as being later developments or accretions that don't go back to their perception of the original pure form of the religion. So, for example, some fundamentalist Christians even go so far as to reject Christian holidays like Christmas or Easter, or at least they'll reject ways of celebrating those they regard as having their roots in paganism as opposed to Christianity. So the custom of the Christmas tree or the Easter bunny, searching for Easter eggs, etc., those may have had their origin in pagan religions in Europe. And so even though they're a part of the way Christmas is celebrated by many Christians, because those were not a part of original Christianity, they might be rejected by fundamentalists for that reason. So let's conclude by giving some examples of fundamentalist religions. As mentioned, fundamentalism began in Christianity in the late early 1900s. So this is probably the case because modern science first developed in European and Western nations such as Germany, France, the UK, and the United States, among others. And so those were the first societies where scientific discoveries came into sharp contrast with traditional religious beliefs, which caused many religious people to modify their beliefs and accept science, but some religious people became fundamentalists and rejected certain aspects of science. So these were typically fundamentalist Christians because Christianity was by far the majority religion. More recently, in the 20th century, there's arisen fundamentalism in other religions, such as Islam. Islamic fundamentalism is a major movement now. Islam had sort of gone a little bit into decline in a lot of Muslim societies in the, say, early to mid 20th century. It's not that everyone stopped being Muslim, but many people focused more on non-religious aspects of life, and many of them wore Western clothing. Many women did not wear hijab in Muslim countries, and that does continue in many parts of the Muslim world, but it's become more common since the mid 20th century for Muslims to be fundamentalist, to go back to wearing hijab. For example, if they're women, it's not a marker of fundamentalism, but it's just an example of how more traditional forms of Islam have become more prominent in recent decades. And it's interesting that the most rapidly growing religions in the world currently are evangelical and Pentecostal Christianity. Pentecostal Christianity is generally an example of Christian fundamentalism, and fundamentalist Islam. Those are both growing pretty rapidly, especially in developing nations like Sub-Saharan Africa, South America, Central America, and parts of Asia as well. So another use of the word religious fundamentalism is to refer to what may be perhaps better called religious nationalism. So some religions are called fundamentalist if they combine religion with national identity. So an example of this is some types of political Islam, which may be trying to link citizenship or membership of a national community with belief in Islam, and also thinking that Muslim principles such as Sharia or traditional Muslim law should be the law of the land in a particular nation. There are other examples of this in Asia, such as the Hindutva movement in modern India, which regards Hinduism as a part of Indian national identity. This is often called Hindu nationalism, but it's also called Hindu fundamentalism or fundamentalist Hinduism. Another example in Buddhism is the 969 movement in Myanmar or Burma, which regards Buddhism as part of the Burmese national identity and advocates discrimination of and forced removal of a Muslim minority known as the Rohingyas. Pictured on the right is Sayyid Qutb, an Egyptian Muslim who was very influential in founding modern Islamic fundamentalism and political Islam.